Can a man spend 20 years telling people to trust God while secretly begging for one reason to believe in God? Well, let's see. Every Sunday, hundreds of people shouted Amen because of Pastor Daniel. But every Monday, he locked his bedroom door, fell to his knees, and whispered the same terrifying question. God, are you even listening anymore? Nobody knew, not his wife or the church elders, not even thousands of people who called him daddy. Because the greatest secret inside Grace Promise Chapel was hidden behind the smile of the man standing on the altar. Pastor Daniel Adeyemi was one of the most respected pastors in Ibadan. People traveled from Abeokuta, Lagos, Osogbo, and even Abuja just to attend the Sunday services. He was known for one thing, which was hope. Whenever people entered his church carrying heavy burdens, they left believing tomorrow could be better. His sermons were never complicated. They were, God has not forgotten you. Your season will change. Don't stop praying. His words healed broken hearts, or at least that's what everyone believed. Because every Sunday morning, Pastor Daniel preached with confidence. He smiled, he laughed, he encouraged everyone. He prayed until tears filled people's eyes. The congregation admired him. If pastor can believe like this, then surely my own miracle is coming. But nobody knew what happened after every service. Once he got home, he would quietly remove his suit, place his Bible on the table, walk into his bedroom, lock the door. Then he would cry. The kind of crying that left your chest hurting. Sometimes he stayed on the floor for hours, just staring at the ceiling, waiting, listening, hoping he would hear something. But the room always remained silent. Years earlier, Pastor Daniel's faith was unshakable until his 18-year-old daughter, Peace, became seriously ill. It started with ordinary tiredness, then frequent hospital visits, then weeks turned into months. Doctors tried different treatments. Family members organized prayer meetings. The church fasted together. Every night, Pastor Daniel laid his hands on his daughter. Father, please heal my little girl. Every morning, she still woke up weak. He fasted, nothing changed. He prayed through the night, but nothing still changed. He quoted every Bible verse he knew, still nothing changed. At first, he told himself, God is testing my faith. Months later, he whispered something he never thought he would say. What if I'm talking to nobody? That question frightened him. He immediately asked God for forgiveness. But the next day, the same question returned again and again. Soon, it became a battle inside his mind. On Sundays, he stood behind the pulpit saying, never lose your faith. On Mondays, he wondered whether he still had any faith at all. The guilt was eating him alive. He wasn't pretending because he wanted money. He wasn't trying to deceive people. He desperately wanted to believe the words he preached. He just couldn't understand why the God he had served faithfully for over 20 years seemed so silent when his own daughter needed him the most. One Tuesday evening, while everyone in the house was asleep, Pastor Daniel walked into the empty church auditorium. The lights were off. Only the moonlight entered through the windows. He stood before the altar where thousands had watched him preach. Slowly, he climbed onto the pulpit, looked at the empty chairs, and in a trembling voice he whispered, if you are really there, please say something. Just say anything. But there was nothing, only the sound of the ceiling fan turning above him. Pastor Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in his life, the man who had taught thousands how to trust God, the man who has healed many sick people, walked away from the altar, feeling completely alone. The following Sunday, Pastor Daniel stood behind the pulpit again. The church was full. Children laughed. The choir sang with joy. Hands were lifted in worship. Everything looked normal, but inside, a storm was raging. He opened his Bible. His fingers trembled so slightly that only he noticed it. He smiled. "Tell your neighbor," he began with his usual warm voice. "Tell your neighbor God has not forgotten you." The church responded loudly, "Amen." He forced another smile. "If you believe that, clap for Jesus." The auditorium exploded in applause. But every clap felt like another weight on his chest. What if I'm giving them hope while I have almost nothing left? For the first time in 20 years, the words he preached felt heavier than ever. After the service, as always, people surrounded him. "Pastor, your message was exactly what I needed. My business is improving because of your prayers. Oh, while you were preaching, my left leg that has been paining me got healed. My family has peace again. God is using you greatly, sir." Pastor Daniel thanked each person politely, but inside he kept thinking, if only they knew. Then an elderly woman slowly walked towards him. Her name was Mama Grace. She had attended Grace Promise Chapel from the very first Sunday the church opened. She wasn't rich or famous. She never stood on the altar. Most people barely noticed her, but everyone knew one thing. Whenever someone was hurting, Mama Grace was there. She gently held Pastor Daniel's hand. "My son." He smiled. "Good afternoon, Mama." She looked into his eyes for a long time. Then she asked quietly, "Are you sleeping well?" Pastor Daniel froze. His smile almost disappeared. "I'm fine, Mama." She nodded gently. "Okay." Then she walked away. That was all. No long conversation or advice. But somehow it stayed in his mind all day. That evening, Peace had another hospital appointment. The doctor studied her latest test results. Pastor Daniel and his wife Esther sat silently. The room felt unbearably quiet. Finally, the doctor looked up. "We are seeing some improvements." Esther immediately smiled. But the doctor continued, "She still needs time. Please don't lose hope." That word again, hope. Everyone kept telling him not to lose hope, but nobody knew he had been searching for it for months. On the drive home, Peace sat quietly in the back seat. Then she spoke. "Daddy." "Yes, my princess. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked out the window. "Why do people keep praying for me every Sunday?" Pastor Daniel swallowed. "Because they love you." She smiled softly. "I love them too." Then she asked something that stopped his heart. "I pray for them every night." He looked into the rear view mirror. "You do?" She nodded happily. "I tell God to make everybody in church smile." Pastor Daniel couldn't speak. This little girl, who was carrying the greatest burden in the family, wasn't asking God only for herself. She was praying for everyone else. He looked away quickly before anyone noticed the tears coming in his face. The following Wednesday, the church held its weekly prayer meeting. Pastor Daniel stood at the front as members prayed passionately. Some prayed for jobs, others prayed for marriages, some prayed for healing. Then he heard something unexpected. One after another, people began mentioning his name. "Lord, strengthen our pastor. Give Pastor Daniel fresh joy. Carry him when he is tired. Father, encourage your servant." Pastor Daniel slowly lifted his head. He hadn't asked anyone to pray for him. In fact, he had become so focused on carrying everyone else's burden. He had forgotten that they loved him too. As the prayers continued, he noticed tears rolling down his wife's face. She wasn't praying for peace. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying quietly. "For my husband, Lord, please give him rest." His heart broke immediately he heard that. He suddenly realized he had become so determined to hide his pain that the people who loved him most had been suffering in silence with him. That night, he finally told Esther the truth. "I don't know what's happening to me. She listened quietly. I pray, but sometimes it feels like my words never leave the room. More tears came to Esther's face. I stand before hundreds of people every Sunday, but inside I feel empty. I keep asking God if He's there. I hate myself for thinking that. Then he started crying and lowered his head. I feel ashamed. For several seconds, Esther said nothing. Then she gently reached across the table and held his hands. Then she whispered, Daniel, I've been waiting for you to say this. He looked up in surprise. She smiled through tears. I married a man, not a machine. You spent years allowing people to lean on you. She squeezed his hands gently. But who told you that you weren't allowed to lean on someone too? For the first time in months, Pastor Daniel didn't feel judged. He simply felt seen, and somehow that small moment brought him more comfort than all the answers he had been desperately searching for. But he still had one question burning inside him. If God had never left, why had the silence felt so loud? The next Sunday, Grace Promise Chapel was overflowing. People stood at the back, others watched through the open windows. Nobody knew this would become the most unforgettable service in the history of the church. Pastor Daniel walked slowly toward the altar. His Bible was in his hands, but this time his heart felt different. Not because all his questions had disappeared. They hadn't. Peace was still recovering. There were still hospital visits. There were still moments when heaven felt silent. The questions were still there, but for the first time, he wasn't pretending they didn't exist. He looked across the congregation. For years, he had seen them as people who needed him. Now, he saw something else. He saw a family. People who had been carrying him without him realizing it. He took a deep breath, opened his Bible, closed it again. The church became completely silent. Then he said something no one expected. Today, I didn't come here to preach. I came here to tell you the truth. The whole church froze. I have spent many months asking God questions. No one moved. I have prayed, I have fasted, I have cried. And there were nights when I wondered if God could ever hear me. Some members exchanged surprised looks. Others simply listened to him quietly. Pastor Daniel's voice shook. I thought a pastor had to be strong every day. I thought I had to smile even when my heart was breaking. I thought admitting my struggles meant I had failed. A tear rolled down his cheek, but I was wrong. He looked toward the front row. His wife smiled through tears. Beside her, Peace smiled and gave him a tiny wave. He smiled back. Then he continued, I kept asking God for a miracle. But while I was looking towards heaven, I forgot to look around me. He pointed gently towards the congregation. You prayed for me. You encouraged my family. You visited us. You brought food. You sat with my wife. You kept believing even when I couldn't. The church was silent except for quiet sobbing. Then Pastor Daniel noticed someone standing. It was Mama Grace. The elderly woman slowly walked towards the front row. She didn't take the microphone. She simply smiled. My son. The whole church listened. When Moses became tired, he did not stop being God's servant. He simply needed people to hold up his hands. She reached out and held Pastor Daniel's hand. You thought you were carrying this church, but God was using this church to carry you. Pastor Daniel could no longer hold back his tears. He cried openly. Not as a famous pastor, not as a respected leader, just as a father, just as a man. One by one, members left their seats. Nobody rushed or shouted. They quietly gathered around their pastor. Some placed a hand on his shoulder. Others simply stood beside him. No one tried to explain why difficult seasons happen. No one gave long speeches. Their presence said enough. And for several minutes, the entire church prayed together. Not because Pastor Daniel asked them to, but because love moved them to. And a few weeks later, Peace returned for another medical checkup. The doctor smiled as he read her latest results. She responded very well. Please, continue what you are doing. Pastor Daniel looked at his daughter. She laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. His eyes filled with tears again. On the drive home, Peace reached for his hands. Daddy, yes, my princess, God heard us. Pastor Daniel smiled. Yes, he did. That evening, he returned to the empty church auditorium, the same place where months earlier he had stood asking God if he was there. He walked to the altar again. The room was just as quiet. The ceiling fan still turned slowly above him. But this time, the silence didn't frighten him. He finally understood. Faith was never about having every answer. Faith was choosing to keep walking even when the road ahead wasn't clear. Faith was choosing to keep loving even when life became painful. Faith was choosing to obey even while carrying unanswered questions. He looked around the empty church and smiled. He said, God had never left me. Sometimes God answered through the prayers, the kindness, the patience, and the love of ordinary people. Pastor Daniel bowed his head. He was not going to ask if God was there, but he simply whispered, "Thank you for never letting me walk alone." If the story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what part of Pastor Daniel's journey spoke to you the most. If you believe someone else needs this message of hope today, please like this video, share it with someone who may be going through a difficult season, and subscribe for more stories. Remember, having questions doesn't always mean you are losing your faith. Sometimes it means you are still walking and refusing to give up.